Infrastructure stress is largely invisible to operators. In many organizations, infrastructure stress is treated as something operators should be able to see. If a system is under strain, the assumption goes alarms will trigger, dashboards will change color, performance metrics will drift. Someone will know. In reality, some of the most consequential infrastructure stress never shows up that way. It accumulates quietly, inside assets that still function, processes that still run, and systems that still meet formal requirements. By the time stress becomes visible, it is often because options have already narrowed. The challenge is not operator inattention. It is that modern infrastructure is increasingly stressed in ways operators are not equipped to observe directly. Why stress doesn't show up on screens. Most operational monitoring systems are designed to detect failure, not pressure. They track uptime, throughput, temperature thresholds, voltage ranges, and alarm conditions. These are essential controls, but they are binary by nature. They tell operators when a system has crossed a line, not how close it is to one. As infrastructure systems age, loads increase, and variability grows, stress often lives in the space below alarm thresholds. Equipment running hotter than intended, but still within limits. Redundancy consumed during normal operations. Maintenance tasks deferred to preserve uptime. Recovery margins shrinking after routine disruptions. None of these conditions necessarily trigger alerts. They feel manageable in isolation. Together, they change how a system behaves under stress. Operators can be doing everything right and still be flying partially blind. The shift from observable failure to latent strain. Historically, infrastructure failure was easier to anticipate because systems degraded in visible ways. Wear was physical, capacity was static, operating environments were stable. That context no longer holds. Today's infrastructure operates in denser, more variable conditions. Electrification, automation, and digital integration increase baseline load. Weather volatility introduces stress patterns systems were not designed for. Supply chain and staffing constraints affect maintenance timing and response capacity. Stress no longer announces itself as a single anomaly. It shows up as loss of margin. Operators feel this as tighter tolerances, fewer workarounds, and less room for error. But those signals are experiential, not easily translated into dashboards or reports. When operator judgment becomes the last buffer. As stress becomes harder to observe, organizations increasingly rely on operator judgment to manage it. Operators learn which systems are touchy. They know when to delay certain tasks, how to stagger loads, and which alarms to treat as warnings rather than emergencies. These adjustments keep operations running, but they also mask structural exposure. Over time, judgment becomes a substitute for capacity. This is not a failure of professionalism. It is a rational response to systems under pressure, but it creates fragility. When experienced operators are absent, conditions change unexpectedly, or multiple stresses coincide, the system loses its last informal buffer. The risk was never absent. It was simply managed quietly. Why visibility gaps become organizational risk. The invisibility of infrastructure stress creates a disconnect between operators and decision makers. Leadership often sees stable performance indicators. Uptime met, incidents avoided, compliance achieved. Operators see narrowing margins, workarounds, and growing sensitivity to disruption. Both views can be true at the same time. The problem arises when decisions, capital deferrals, staffing reductions, expansion plans, are made based on indicators that do not reflect how close systems are to their limits. This is how organizations drift into exposure without realizing it. Not through neglect, but through incomplete visibility. Data isn't the same as insight. Many organizations respond to this challenge by adding more data, more sensors, more dashboards, more reporting layers. Data helps, but only if it is interpreted in context. Infrastructure stress is often about relationships, not readings, how systems interact under load, how recovery time changes, how much redundancy remains after routine events. These dynamics are difficult to quantify and easy to overlook. They require synthesis across operations maintenance, energy, and risk, not just instrumentation. Without that synthesis, more data can reinforce false confidence rather than reduce uncertainty. What early stress actually looks like. Infrastructure stress becomes visible not through single metrics, but through patterns. Increasing effort required to maintain the same level of performance. growing dependence on sequencing and timing to avoid issues, reduced tolerance for weather variability or supply disruptions, longer recovery times from events once considered minor. Operators recognize these patterns intuitively. The challenge is elevating them into decision frameworks before stress becomes failure. Making the invisible, actionable organizations that manage infrastructure risk effectively do not wait for stress to become visible through incidents. They actively ask questions that dashboards alone cannot answer. Where have margins narrowed, even if performance looks stable? Which systems rely most heavily on operator judgment to function? How has recovery capacity changed over time? What assumptions about reliability are no longer safe? These questions force visibility where instrumentation cannot. They also shift the conversation from blame to alignment between what operators experience and what leadership decides. The strategic implication infrastructure stress does not need to be dramatic to be dangerous. Its most consequential form is often the least visible. Operators are not missing the signals. The signals are simply not designed to travel upward in the way decisions are made. As systems run closer to their limits, the organizations best positioned to respond are those that treat invisibility itself as a risk, one that deserves attention before stress turns into disruption. Seeing infrastructure stress early is not about better alarms. It is about recognizing that the most important warnings are often the quietest. You've been listening to Sustainability Soundbites by Environment and Energy Leader. For partnership opportunities, please reach out to our team.